6 river otters have been reintroduced to the upper Rio Grande from Washington state in an effort to return the mammals to their native habitat in New Mexico. They joined 10 other otters released last year. Otters were last seen in our rivers in the 1950s. Valerie Williams, a wildlife biologist for the Bureau of Land Management, says the species became extinct here due to trapping and changes to their habitat.
They were trapped out as a fur bearer. They're highly valued for their pelts. So they were taken, and also I think water use changed over time, and so habitat was not as great as it was in the past as water continues to be used and diverted.
River otters are important to the aquatic ecosystem of New Mexico in that they will feed off non-native crayfish and typically leave the trout alone.
River otters have not been in the state for a long time, and they are a top predator in an aquatic ecosystem. They're really important in that they feed on non-native fish and crayfish that are non-native to the system. Typically, kind of lazy animals. They're not going to get the fast-swimming trout species, the cold water trout species that everyone likes to fish for. So they're really helpful in that they catch the slow fish. And a lot of the non-native warm water species are slower swimmers. So they're important in an ecosystem to keep the food webs intact and provide resources then for our native species like the cold water trout species.
Jim Stewart with the Department of Game and Fish says the process to reintroduce otters started back in the 1980s.
It's been a fairly long process. There were people that contacted the Game and Fish Department way back in the 1980s that New Mexico should be doing reintroductions of otters because we didn't have any evidence of otters in the state since the 1950s. And other states around the country have done reintroductions of otters after their populations disappeared also. So New Mexico was kind of pushed to do it in the 1980s, but wasn't until about 2000 that an organized effort by a group called New Mexico Friends of the River Otter started lobbying for the Game and Fish Department to pursue this, and that started the ball rolling. So here we are in 2009, and we're in our second year of reintroduction.
Stewart believes there's about 15 otters currently in New Mexico, but no one can be sure since there aren't any devices used to track the animals.
We did not put any kind of radio transmitters on these otters. Otters are tough to track because you can't put a radio collar on them like you can for deer or bighorn sheep. You have to actually surgically implant a transmitter within the abdomen of the animal. Given the relatively small number of animals we were likely to get, between the New Mexico Game and Fish and New Mexico Friends of the River Otter decided we would not do that. So we are indirectly tracking them by going out looking for tracks, looking for scat, other signs. Observations from the public are very valuable, and we've been able to determine where otters are in the state right now, or within the Rio Grande, pretty much by those indirect methods.
The otters were released into the Rio de Taos Pueblo, but have since moved quite extensively.
The release was in the Rio Pueblo de Taos, on Taos Pueblo land, which was a few miles upriver from where that river goes into the Rio Grande. Most of the animals have moved downstream and into the Rio Grande, and then they've gone upstream and downstream from that point. A lot of the observations we get now are from the area of White Rock Canyon upstream to Narrow Arroyo Hondo and that general area. So it's a fairly long stretch of river. These animals have really moved since they were released.
More otters will arrive in the future from Washington state. Jim Stewart says the goal is to introduce 30 otters in total. This would be about an otter per river mile.
We are still working on getting otters from Washington state. We're trying to keep that relationship with Wildlife Services in Washington going. We're working with BLM in the Upper Rio Grande along with Taos Pueblo. There's a lot of people involved, a lot of different organizations and agencies, and we hope to kind of continue to get animals as they're caught in Washington and bring them in, not only this year, 2009, but through 2010 as well. We're shooting for a number of about 30 otters. If we can release about 30, we think that would be a good start to establishing a population in the Rio Grande drainage.
Besides their benefit to the ecosystem of our rivers, otters are also cute and a welcome neighbor. Wildlife biologist Valerie Williams elaborates.
I think river otters are one of the charismatic species out there, that they are very social, very playful. I mean, we've got some photographs where they look like they're virtually smiling. So, for wildlife species out there that are fun to watch and entertaining, river otters are right up there. I'm really excited to have them not only for the ecosystem, but also for people to enjoy.
For KSFR News, I'm Rachel Kennedy.